would the outcome of that scene have been any different?
Well, I would hope that no, it wouldn't. But
Right.
this illustrates, I would say, one of the challenges in our society is because there was this there's this question about, oh my God, and there's a moment of intensity about that, not necessarily because somebody's stepping over the berm into the fray. It's a woman.
Well, but even still, you could use any superhuman anybody.
Like Leroy Jenkins.
If you could lead a charge like Wonder Woman, what would your no man's land look like? And no lands, it's not the long line to Starbucks.
Oh, he came with it. Man.
Yeah, he went there.
Yeah.
Funny thing is, my wife really loves Starbucks, and I'm happy with just Folgers.
Just regular. Do you like cheap? I think that might be the Marine Corps.
Oh, 100%.
It is
Yeah.
100%.
Hundo,
Yes.
man.
Yeah,
Does it
we'll
decondition
microwave
you
coffee.
from having good taste or like?
No.
Yeah.
That's nice. Touche, my sister.
No sugar.
I'm curious. Oh,
Yeah. Oh, and yeah, we're doing Whole30 now, so I'm in no sugar zone right now.
The what? The
It's
what?
called
Whole
Whole30.
30?
It's like a
Whole 30.
it's a
Is it like
you
the Hard
kinda-
75?
but less.
Similar.
Yeah, but
and-
like a mixture of 42.
yeah,
I was gonna do dry January,
72.
and then
Oh,
I
yeah.
forgot.
it's resulting in that.
Right.
Yeah, there's
And
no
wine,
alcohol.
wine happened, and just
Oh,
I was like, oh yeah, that I drank that.
Yeah.
You do
It's
a
like-
lot of health and wellness stuff. How is that similar to like the?
So Whole30 is no sugar. You cut out grains. You basically eat lots of meat and fruit and vegetables. But the challenge for me is the sugar thing because I like to, and it's even no fake sugars too.
Mm.
So that
No
would be.
stevia.
So the
So that- so my-
similarity
I would
would
say
be
my no man's land right now is the austerity of choice that I am dealing with right now.
Okay. I can relate to that. Sugar would be a very hard thing for me to kick, especially caffeine.
Right,
Yeah.
So
And I'm as fit as I am. I'm freaking diabetic now.
What?
Yeah.
type 1?
I
When
don't
did that
know.
happen?
What do you mean you don't
about
know?
I don't know, 4 months ago.
Really? You never told us?
Hmm.
Yeah, I know.
Hold
Sorry,
on.
dude. I
Yeah,
told you
but
about the
you can
whole.
Dude, there was so many
colonoscopy.
There's so many Wilson Brimley jokes that we could have come with on this.
I know.
similarity there would be the the lack of junk,
Yeah.
but also to the omission of vegetables.
'Cause you're big on no vegetables, no processed foods, no
Mhm.
sugars.
Dead food. No dead food.
Dead food.
I think do you have alcohol stuff in your diet that says no alcohol?
No,
Oh, you don't
No.
have, okay.
it's certain types,
Well,
right? So again, you want to avoid
Great.
grains and vegetables, right? So you would omit those types of alcohols. You could go with things like ciders and mash and
okay.
things like that. So
Tequila?
it's strict, huh?
Tequila's from agave.
Is that
It's a
a
veg.
vegetable?
Mhm.
Oh,
It's a cactus.
Yeah,
I don't know how you
cacti is
classify
like
it.
it's a
It's like
gray
its own-
area.
Okay,
So-
yeah, that's why I asked, because I knew it was
Yeah.
like cactus, but is it a vegetable? Is it a fruit? Is it just a plant? Because if you look at I don't know, I'm not
You're not a
familiar with
botanist.
plants. I'm not a botanist,
Mm-hmm.
but if you have like just a vine, is that a vegetable?
Yeah, it's a bit of a gray area because it can be used in a variety of different ways. But yeah, so anyway, yeah, the omission of that. If you were going to drink alcohol, it'd probably be like an apple-based cider or something like
Okay.
that.
But
So
wine is totally cool. 'cause that comes
wine's
with
fine because that's a
Yeah, that's
fruit,
fruit.
right?
That's
So
just
fruit-based
Suzanna.
alcohols are
I
fine.
would- yeah,
Fermentation is
yeah.
fine,
I
but
don't know how to give up vegetables. That's
Really?
Yeah, that's a foreign.
Big thing for you.
Love vegetables. Yeah.
is it the vegetables you love or is it the seasonings and stuff you put with it?
Well, it's also the absence of meat that I love. So I don't eat meat, but I don't. Yeah,
It's a
that leaves
B12 issue.
carbs. Be
So what's your no man's land?
My no man's land. If
You're
I
gonna
were,
charge across something. You got to conquer something. What are you trying to conquer?
what am I trying to conquer? The stock market, man. Mostly.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm trying to beat that thing. It's
Every
winning.
day.
It's winning. It's got a good streak on me right now. Stock market. No, but that's fun stuff. I think the real thing is when I work with Dave and I go and I throw my little ideas towards the 10COM, which is a communication strategy I have inside of intervention strategy. When I throw that towards him, and I just throw it out there because I know he'll be objective. He'll say like, yeah, this will work or that won't work. So my no man's land is getting to that final destination of making that a practice that is used by universities, colleges, just in general, just a thing that people go like, oh yeah, this is a practice we can use so people don't hurt themselves.
Have you connected with Suspenders of Hope group at Wichita State?
No, I haven't.
Let's talk about that.
Okay, absolutely.
No. Susanna, what would be your no man's
My
land?
no man's land is my mind.
Mind?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Like meditation and trying to, deprogram myself from rumination, right? Like catching myself on the front end of a rumination before I'm just off and running, like, for 10
Spiraling.
minutes. And yeah, like just recognizing what am I allowing my mind to do or not do, and kind of just like when you're walking a dog, you don't let your dog run off in traffic. You kind of like pull the leash on it a little bit, because you want to keep it safe. And so I'm really trying to take better care of my mind.
Like that. Dave?
I would say mine would be mastery of my chosen disciplines. Just constantly trying to find where my flaws are, and where are my knowledge gaps, and how can I improve upon the various theorems that that I've been working with, and various contexts and applications, so I can be, for lack of better words, Johnny on the spot in deployment with organizations or individuals and stuff like that.
I always find it fascinating that you are so improvement minded. There's always this drive of becoming better, but yet you still maintain a good sense of grace with yourself in the present. And that's it kind of goes back to what you're saying, Suzanna, in terms of our minds get going, and we're thinking about the future so much, and we're agonizing over it to a certain extent, to the point that we at the expense of the present. And so I know I do that. I'm a big I like to meditate as well, and so that's one thing. But yet still, I find myself spinning in the what ifs. But you do. I've always been impressed with the way you kind of keep that, or maybe you just hide it very well. I don't know.
I think Dave has a very high sense of self-worth, though, so it's not coming from a place of that he has to know these things to prove something, to himself, so much as it is like
I appreciate that. It's a daily challenge. And the funny thing is, and you guys have probably heard me say this, I think it's really important that we submit to our disciplines, right? And so to do that, we have to acknowledge that gaps exist, right? The more you know you don't know, right? So it's, to be the expert, you have to be a perpetual student. It's paradoxical.
Dunning-Kruger.
Yeah. And so we have to submit. And then we find a comfort. And this is the trick in a lot of ways, is to find a comfort in the uncomfortable nature, right? So you think about like imposter syndrome, that comes from knowing something, right? You have to know something in order to know you don't know something. But by not knowing something, you get that uncomfortable feeling, that imposter syndrome. Well, you have to learn to become comfortable with the uncomfortable and submit, be the student, and allow that to guide you to say, okay, well, I don't know everything, so I need to continue to learn. And so it turns into a stronger feeling that instead of it being a crippling thing in our lives, it's to inform us that I'm on the right path. That feeling is getting bigger. And so it is, but it's simultaneously very humbling, right? It allows me, going to the leash, to speak to what I know, listen to what I don't, sort of a thing. Like, okay, well, you don't know that, learn. This could fill that gap today.
Yeah, I feel much more comfortable saying, I don't know these
Yeah.
days, and that comes with confidence, a sense of self that is accepting of the fact that, going back to the IFS conversation we had, my sense of self, those C's, the curiosity,
Internal family
creativity,
systems.
internal family systems. Thank you. So those understanding the value of that self is stronger these days. So
My favorite phrase is, I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah, you got on to me one time because you picked up on that, probably session 2 working with you. I will just dig. You'll ask me a question, and I will dig in the dirt.
Trying to make up shit.
Just
Just keep going.
well, this could be this, and this could be that, and you just stop. You're like, I love you, brother, but just say I don't know.
Yeah.
Because he would have gone all the way to
Bless
China.
you for
Yeah.
trying to find
I
it.
would have gone for another hour. I think it would probably have just you were sick of it.
Taking mercy on the guy.
This kid's like, it's all right, and it's funny because it's one of my favorite phrases in in my programs. Just it's okay, just submit. It's all right. And that's because that's where growth starts.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right? It's not in inventing or consensus, right? I mean, and we've talked about this too. Consensus is not good for growth. It's not good for innovation, right? So we have to have some bounce here in order to find improvement.
Yeah.
Right? You and I could agree on something 1,000,000%, and that just really means that we're not going to improve whatever it is we're working on.
Yeah.
It's only with that confrontation and that divide in ideas where, oh, well, that's interesting, and this is interesting. All right, well, look at what else we can do, and so we come up with really cool things.
It's almost like the key is in the
Is in the
contrast.
contrast. It's really
He
strange.
did that
He
thing.
did the thing.
I didn't
He's
do it.
always the guy.
I didn't do it last episode though.
You didn't.
You didn't.
I did.
No.
You got to do it twice now.
Yeah.
I don't know if I
Maybe
can.
later. No, later you
I
got.
don't
just
wanna
gotta-
be
And
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
spent.
Now you told me to do it. I don't want to do it.
You can't do it on command.
Speaking about mastery of your craft, I'm curious about Suzanna's craft.
Mm.
Yeah, actually, as we get ready to kick off the next segment,
Yeah.
Suzanna, you are
Hi.
known as the date maven. So you are what we would call basically a matchmaker. Is that right?
That's
But
correct.
you also have more experience than just that.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about you.
So I'm an executive matchmaker and dating and relationship coach and psychedelic integration coach and mother of 2 grown children, which to me is that's the most important part of everything I just said, because they're awesome and I love them.
What's the integrative
Yeah.
coaching?
Yeah,
What is
so
it?
that's a little bit of a new or emerging type of role. So, many of us probably know people who are working on their mental health. We probably know people who have struggled with anxiety, depression, PTSD, even suicide ideation. And a lot of those individuals have not found the peace and the freedom that they're looking for in conventional talk therapy. Or it just hasn't quite taken them far enough. And so oftentimes people will seek out psychedelic medicines to, just kind of get over those humps and really get some traction on the mental health front. But I don't think any one of us recommends doing that alone. Usually with the help of a therapist or a coach is the way to kind of proceed in that territory. Ketamine is legal in all states now and can be administered in a variety of different settings. But it's really important to work with someone who understands, just the potential of it and how to prepare someone, be with someone, and then integrate the experiences from the journey.
I've got experience with that. Part of my PTSD healing process involved psychedelic assisted therapy. So I'm a big fan and proponent of it. I mean, in terms of your background with suicide intervention, and
Yeah.
I think that's something that is relevant.
It's actually, so I'm glad we ran into you. I'd say maybe 6 months ago, I put a message out there saying I wanted to actually run into somebody that was a leader in the field with that. So that's pretty cool. We
Yeah,
ran into you.
yeah.
And I think we should do a whole episode like that.
Oh, I bet you there's a great
Yeah.
clip that we could use, and we
Yeah.
could bring Suzanna back for
Yeah,
that.
we should do that.
There's a lot of research going on as
Yeah.
well on these.
Put the cameras on and
So-
just go.
Let's
Oh.
just
Yeah.
let it roll.
I think
could
I hear
sh-
you saying I should bring the party favors, but you
Yeah.
should probably.
Well, what led
Right.
you to your career field?
Yeah.
What steps led you to be a
It's
matchmaker?
Such a convoluted story, but I have always been fascinated in the communication differences and just behavioral differences between men and women. And so when I was an undergrad, I was writing a research paper about the role of pheromones, of all things, in the mating habits of insects, specifically moths and cockroaches. So pheromones are these little chemical emissions that most all beings make, pretty much all animals and insects make. And, they either kind of turn on or turn off whoever is on the receiving end of those pheromones. And so when I learned that that didn't just apply to the insect world, but also the human world, that kind of started me down a certain road. That road kind of took a different turn when I was teaching speech and theater at the college level, and some of my students were researching different online dating sites, doing a little bit of a comparison, contrast, and sort of a consumer report style, if you will. And at that point, I had been kind of ad hoc giving advice to people who were seeking it out, like not in any sort of professional fashion, but I had students that would, come sit in my chair and say, how do I know if this girl is into me? Or how do I let her know I'm into her? I hooked up with this guy. He's not calling me back. What should I do? So those were the questions I was kind of answering off hours in somewhat social settings with students. And so I realized, hey, there's a whole industry here. And I wasn't going to go farther in academia, so I retrained with someone who was using her MBA from Harvard, as it was, in branding and marketing, to help single people identify how to position themselves in the dating market as if they themselves were kind of like the product, so to speak. Matchmaking is a huge industry. I think it's estimated to be a $4.2 billion industry globally.
Gentlemen, we're in the wrong
With a
field.
With a B by 2027, so that's in the next 2 years, about 1 billion of that here in the U.S.
Wow.
And I'm not even counting dating apps. That's
Oh my
matchmaking
goodness.
alone.
That's face-to-face matchmaking specialists.
That's grown up money there. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is what that
Wow.
is. Yeah.
We probably need to get, isn't it? Gavin, we need to get Gavin in on that at some point.
Yeah, I think you need to talk to Gavin.
Yeah,
Okay.
Gavin, you in
Yeah.
on that?
I'm open for a conversation.
All
Okay.
right. That's a wild story that it started with. So like, I'm caught up on how it started. It started with
Yeah.
sex with bugs.
Sex with bugs. How,
Well, bugs have
Well, I
sex.
mean, come on, that's hot.
Yeah. I don't need your good reputation.
Thank you for
Bugs
the
have-
clarification.
Yeah, I know
Let me
you're
rewind.
weird, Chili, but you ain't that weird.
That's a whole new.
It started.
Depends on the size of the bug. I mean,
Yeah,
Beetles
it
can
started
get pretty
with-
I
big.
mean, it's-
Kafka, if you've ever read that story, he was
Ooh,
5
yeah,
feet long.
metamorphosis.
Yeah.
You know.
Right.
See, you know.
I do know. So how rich is the bug? I'm just kidding.
But it started with that, and it's evolved into something. And you have so many disciplines that starting in communications, which I think is huge. That's probably one of the main disciplines you pull.
Yeah.
Because there's gender differences when it comes to
Right.
communication.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I was just having a conversation earlier today with a coaching client who is, I'll let him remain unidentified, but is thinking about kind of if, when, and how to file for divorce from his wife. And so there's the single side of things, and then there's kind of the other side about how do I release a relationship, particularly when maybe I don't hate the person and I want to do this with honor and integrity, and I feel bad and guilty, and we've grown apart, or we just don't have the relationship skills. And so even just helping people through those times of distress,
Yeah.
and having gone through that myself, I understand how distressing that is.
So you know how to navigate it.
I do. And so a lot of the work is around sort of setting them up for success with conversations. I think one of the biggest gaps people have in their relationships, most of us are not talking about the difficult things in a timely way with our partners, in a way that can really invite them to the table and not kind of put them on the defense, right?
Unspoken expectations kind of fall under that.
Unspoken expectations, roles people have just been playing for so long, and we don't even know that there's another alternative. I mean, it can, range the gamut
representative.
from we haven't had sex in 3 years to he never takes out the trash and I'm stinking pissed about it. So we scrimmage those conversations in coaching so that they can have the competency and the confidence to go have them with their spouses or their partners.
One of the things that kind of I was married for 26 years my first time, and I've been married in this current relationship for 6 years, 3 years married. And that the giving one another, first of all, the agreement between two people to always
Work.
give each other the benefit of the doubt.
Yes.
And the other thing is to speak from a point of good intention. Give the other trust that the other person has good intentions, and those two things alone have been hugely illuminating for me in relationships. Once my former wife and I came to that agreement, we didn't put those terms on it at the time, but we were doing that. But that was essential. And so it's one of those, but yet that seems so simple and it seems so obvious, but it's amazing how people ignore that.
The assumption of negative intent is highly destructive.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's big with text because the assumption, like every text that comes through, you see it in black and white. You just assume somebody's just being a jerk, you know, and without the communication.
Well, you're filtering. Your state of mind is filtering that text, which is totally out of context, through your own state of mind.
Yeah, what's that key and peel?
Exactly. My daughter finally told me, Dad, you have to use memes because I don't know what the hell, I don't know what mood you're in.
Use
I'm like,
emojis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I use emojis
thank
a
you.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you know, you may or may not be familiar with the research of John Gottman.
Oh, yeah.
He's one of the preeminent relationship psychologists in the country, and is kind of the person who had the idea to do longitudinal studies, like over not just years but decades, watching couples, and could predict with a high level of accuracy which couples would stay together, which couples would persist, and which couples would divorce.
Is he the one that came up with the 4 horsemen?
He is,
That's
yeah.
what I
So the 4 horsemen of marriage apocalypse, if these show up in your conflict, you have some problems and you need to fix it. And those are contempt, like speaking to your partner with contemptuous tones or words. Criticism, so that would be like maybe calling your partner names and kind of attacking their personhood, attacking their character. Defensiveness. And then stonewalling, which is where it's like, oh, I don't want to hear this. I'm going to go away. Blah, blah, blah.
Shut
I got to go
yourself
to
in
the
the
garage.
room.
Yeah,
Passive
kind of
aggressiveness.
avoiding it.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Well, given today, we're going to be talking about Wonder Woman.
Oh, okay. Yes.
And I hear that you have a
Speaking of
special
content.
relationship to Wonder Woman.
I am Wonder Woman.
Oh,
I'm just
okay.
kidding. But when I was a
Diana?
child,
Is that-
yeah, it's me. Ta-da. When I was a child, I really wanted to be. So much so, you know, it was a Friday night tradition in my home that after dinner I would go downstairs to the basement, turn on the TV. Don't bother me. I'm watching Wonder Woman. And then at some point during the week, I would try to recreate some of her stunts from the front porch. Thinking I could fly.
No.
And yeah, a few visits to the hospital proved otherwise. And my parents were like, when is she going to outgrow this? So,
Susanna, you're 17. This is too old.
yeah, right. Put up the lasso, darling. It's
Or-
time to-
Keep the lasso.
or keep-
out.
yeah.
Well, given that, let's keep it in the Wonder Woman realm. Speaking to you specifically, what do you think is the most significant challenge that men and women have when it comes to perceiving leadership?
I think one of the challenges that we have is viewing it as something that belongs in the corporate world or the career world only, but there is the opportunity to have leadership even within a household, right? Within a home. And a lot of times I see somewhat chaotic homes, not because the people in them are unhealthy or dysfunctional, but it's like the kids are kind of running things. It's like the kids have 5 sports going on times 3 children. Mom and dad are running themselves ragged between work and the drive-through for food and all the sports and things. And like, where's the leadership there? The kids are kind of the ones driving that vehicle, right? At some point you can say, this is our family boundary because we haven't had dinner together at home in a month or whatever it is. So I think that's a good place for leadership to begin.
Okay. Well, you kind of hit on it a little bit earlier, especially with, I think, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse for marriage. What are things that you've seen, keeping it in general terms, that has helped with communication, like in relationships or even in professional setting between men and women? Like, what are some tips or tricks that you've seen? Like, hey, this is how men could better communicate with women, or women, you know, here's how, you know, like I feel like men were pretty direct, you know, so we're not looking for the subtle hints.
Right. Yeah. Need a little more clarity and directness
Right.
there. Yeah. And at the same time, I mean, you know, so a lot of the disconnect, I think, happens in just the reality that Lance mentioned. We all have different perceptual versions of what's happening in any given situation, right? So if we're having a fight of some kind, like you have your version, I have my version, there might be some kind of objectively observable truth that lies in between, but we are really married to each of our versions of what's going on there. And just accepting that I am not going to be able to force my perspective down my partner's throat, and I really don't like it when they try to force theirs down mine. And just kind of like taking a breath and realizing, okay, so given our different perceptual realities, where do we go next? What do we do next?
How does that play into, what's your reaction to that when it comes to, my mind immediately went to epistemic rigidity.
100%. Well, and so there's a couple of things here, right? So we think about, I see those as very similar topics, the two answers to the two questions, right? There is no difference between life and leadership. You've heard me say that. If you can do one, you can do both. Both. Most people do neither. But then there's also the situation too, where we talk about, being married to a certain idea, right? Now we get into the idea where if you have a misconception and you're told the accurate information, you're more prone to defend the misconception. So now we're talking about some of the epistemic rigidity specifically that's going to lock you in because we're in a confrontation trying to defend a position, right? Well, I think this, and well, no, I think that, and so now we're going to be fighting over our perceptions rather than trying to find an accuracy, right? And so when we value accuracy over being right, that opens the door to being wrong or misled or misunderstood or what have you. It's very important that we adopt a mindset of discovery rather than defense, and that's extremely hard to do. And being aware that we have that tendency opens the door to being open.
One of the themes that or phrases that we within Auxesis is a cornerstone of our philosophies is, do you want to be right or do you want to be accurate? And that really has really illuminated my marriage in the sense that so many times we get into this, we keep wanting to lawyer one another, trying to counterpoint and counterpoint.
Yeah.
And that is it's just not helpful.
Right.
But if we can both agree that we're both seeking accuracy, and yes, the key is in the contrast.
There you go.
So,
too.
man, nailed it. But in order to find that key and to hit that point of accuracy, you have to honor both sides of that contrasting views, those contrasting perspectives. I think that's a great input.
Something that I just thought, and if you guys want to explore it with me real quick and walk me through this, is I think more often than not, when we come home, we turn off the perception, like when we're out in public, that there are other people in life. Everyone has their own, what's the saying, everyone's the main character in their movie, in their life, whatnot. When you get home, you kind of shut down that thought process. I feel like you're now in a comfortable space, so now it's you. So now it's that much harder to realize that there is another being in this space with you that still has their own, like I'm the main character of my movie. Why can't you take out the trash? Why did you put the dishes the way that you did in the dishwasher?
Why do you leave drawers open all over the house?
And
Right.
That's a good
You guys are
point.
slobs.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And so one of the ways that we can soften that is common vision, right? But that's something that has to be discussed, right? So and it even on the seemingly minor issues, right? So for example, you cook dinner, right? Maybe the agreement is you cook dinner so the partner does the dishes, right? So it's a team effort. If one cleans the kitchen, the other does the trash. And so there's a team but it has to be discussed. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, I hate doing that. All right, I don't mind doing it. I'll do that. You do the other. And so it turns into a team-oriented situation. But again, how do we build that team? Well, we have to have shared vision. What are we working toward together? And it's got to be clearly defined. And then so every day, while it may be mundane or redundant or whatever, we're still working towards this thing.
And that might be harmony or whatever. You mentioned walking in the house, and this is because we're trying to, our listeners are largely men. Sometimes one lesson that I've literally learned is you'll come through the door, sometimes we need space to decompress. And that is by honoring that, but both. I mean, whether it's the spouse my wife coming home to me or me coming home to my wife, sometimes it's, I forget it. And I come home and I immediately go into this, I'm in husband mode, but I'm not in the mood to be in husband mode, but yet and all of a sudden I'm developing this immediate feeling, this sense of resentment, but there's no reason to. I'm generating that myself just because I did not allow for the context, recognize the context of me coming home. So I would say that for our listeners, and I would be curious if this is any, if I'm on a thread that you've talked about before.
So Dave, you were talking about the idea of a shared vision. I use the term North Star sometimes, like this is what we're aligning ourselves to, and the importance of having that conversation as a couple. Because if both aren't on board, then one's just going to be constantly like pulling teeth from the other. And Lance, you were mentioning that sometimes there's this like a little bit of a disconnect upon arriving home at the end of the day and needing some time to maybe just kind of shift gears a little bit from professional mode to husband-wife mode, that kind of thing. And I do think that it's so simple, but we rarely carve out time to do that. When we give ourselves the margin in our schedules to do that, and we don't just like dive mindlessly right into the next thing, we actually create more resource to do what you were talking about, to follow that vision, follow that North Star.
Could I challenge that? Because I think there's going to be a certain demographic here that probably is hearing all this and thinks that doesn't apply to them. Parents who have kids, small
they
children,
ruin everything,
right? Terrorists, all of them.
Yes.
You go to work, depending on the dynamic of the relationship. More often than not, I'll say statistically, it's more often than not the woman that deals with the school or daycare.
the emotional workload as well as the.
So you go to work, take the kids to school, pick them up from school, bring them home. So there's almost no break for you at all. The men in the relationship more often than not are at jobs that are either physically demanding or psychologically demanding, and then come home and are immediately bombarded by the kids. You know, the wife is saying, take them, or dinner needs to be cooked and it hasn't been done yet. Not that that's the woman's part, but like someone, the adult has to get the food for the kids, right? So when we have these people who they're hearing us like, yeah, take time out for yourself.
Well, it might be 5 minutes. Like, hey, babe, I walked through the door. The way it used to be when I had my kids were little, and I almost kind of set this up. I got a reputation for always being on the toilet, but I would, give me a minute, I got to go to the bathroom. And I would go into the bathroom, and I would sit for 5, sometimes 25 minutes, waiting to just decompress, literally and physically in there, And so that was my time. And the kids sometimes were like, hey, Dad, hey, I want to tell you about my day. And but so it could be 5 minutes. And it goes back to what Dave said. You got to just negotiate it. It might be, okay, hey, honey, I know you've been with the kids all day. You want to talk to an adult. I want to be there for you. Endure for 5 or 10 more minutes. Let me get into my mindset. I'm going to take the kids. You go take your 10, 20, 30 minutes that you need to. It has to be negotiated.
Mm-hmm.
There's another element here to consider, though, too. And we have to remember that you train people how to treat you. And this includes the children, right? So if you're training the children that they are in control and they get what they want when they want it, that's not their fault.
Oh, yeah. Good
right?
point.
And so what we have to do, and this goes back to your comment about leadership in the home, right? If we're going to be respectful of each other, I think that's a good rule, right? But part of that is going to be decompression, boundaries, discipline, right? You will, but also too, like if we set the standard or the culture in the home for children to also unload their day on the parents, that should become the expectation. Tell me about your day. Sure. What did you learn? One of the things that I did with my daughter, I mean, it was relentless every day. What did you learn? You better tell me one thing. Why? Because you just spent an entire day learning something. Show me. And so because we, in our home, we value the knowledge acquisition, show off. Tell me what you got, and so you create the culture. If you create the culture where the children rule the roost, that's exactly what you're going to get.
For us, it was high-low. What's your high today? What's your low today? And high could be something they learned. Low could be I got bullied or whatever it is, and then we would talk about it.
There was a point in my career when I was a college baseball head coach. And I'm dealing with, we talked about sports earlier, and there's sports going on, and families are going around constantly going to sports. I would see that when these freshmen would come in, they were in the sports culture in high school has changed since when I was in. When I was 15, 16-year-old doing all these things, going around getting recruited from different colleges and universities. There wasn't a lot of travel teams. I was on them. I was one of the first ones to really kind of be on a team like that. But now everybody is.
Mhm.
And they're constantly gone. 12 months out of the year. It does not stop.
Oh,
It's
it's
constant.
relentless.
And the parents are exhausted. That you can see it in their faces. I go and I would recruit at these games, and the parents are just like dead inside.
Walking skeletons.
Walking skeletons. And by the time that freshman got to me, for one, their identity was completely altered because they had so much just where they had helicopter parents, almost every single one of them, and their identity was wrapped up in this constantly. Plus, they were in charge. They were in charge of the home. Their schedule dictated everything. So they came to me, and all of a sudden, I'm coach. And I'm fresh out of the Marine Corps when I did this. I was only a couple years out of the Marine Corps, so I'm that kind of coach still. I hadn't washed a lot of that stuff away. So I was very stern, very loud, very abrasive. And they come and they meet that, and I'm not dad who says they can have their schedule. And I had so many kids that would quit, and they were just, and we have the coach say, oh, it's just a soft culture. And I was like, well, it's soft parenting. It's parents letting themselves be run over by. So when you talked about sports earlier, I was like, yeah, I saw it. And it's, where are those kids now? I don't know. Some of them I still talk to, but some of them, their functioning in society is already thwarted, or at least derailed before they ever get a chance.
That makes me. I want to bring it back to the clip a little bit here,
Yeah.
in the sense that a lot of those moms in those situations, they're wanting to help their kids succeed as much as possible. So they're in their mind, they think they're doing the best they can with it. They're expected to be Wonder Woman, raise these awesome human beings, manage the, like you said, Suzanna, the emotional ecosystem within the family unit. Maybe have a career on, likely have a career on the side as well. So I think that's an untenable position to be in for such a long time.
How do you raise a functional adult with dysfunctional tactics?
Yeah, yeah.
Sounds like a good title for a book.
Pure,
Or another podcast episode.
pure will.
It's kind of your adversity nexus, where there's, like, in that situation, there's a reversed leadership, sort of. The leadership is inverted, and so your growth, what happens when you have inverted leadership in that situation?
Well, it's interesting because there's a hidden part there where leadership on the other side also manifests, but it's exactly right. It's an inverted leadership, right? And it actually kind of motivates and perpetuates stagnation and decline.
So it speeds up this process.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right. And so, like I'm not a huge fan of something like servant leadership
Yeah.
because of the safety component, right? This idea that we're not going to have any agency in what we do, and we just kind of got to go along to get along, and everything's okay. That's not true. That's not reality.
Right.
It's not reality. There are things that we have to overcome. There are things we have to strategize. There are going to be uncomfortable moments, and they are good.
And they tie back to what Susanna said about being willing to have those uncomfortable
Difficult
conversations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, let me ask a question of the group, but I want to ask you first, Susanna. What about Wonder Woman embodies traditional gender roles, given from a position of leadership and power?
Yeah. So I really, as I looked at the clip with sort of, these topics and these questions in mind, I thought, she is such a elevated being. She is like the embodiment of compassion, but not the kind of compassion that we feel and we're like, oh, sorry that happened. Oh, we have these little moments of compassion, but just like deep, profound, responsive to human suffering compassion, the kind of compassion that's like, we got to stop everything and do something about this, right? And then you kind of watch her emote through that moment, and she summons this ferocity and this strength and this like inner reserve of something, that most of us aren't really called upon to to produce on a regular basis. And that is how she's able to not just sort of feel compassion, but to transform out of compassion.
I would even say that the clip perfectly encapsulated that. When we watched that little bit on Monday, you could tell whether, good acting or script writing, whatever, but, she was wearing the overcoat and came off as meek, kind of, still like the
not in her
fragile
role.
woman,
Small,
you know,
yeah.
exactly, not yet, but then you see her go through the transformation that once
Mhm.
that coat came off and she's Wonder Woman. Like, now
Shoulders
it's,
are back and the hair is free. Yeah.
Usually,
But I think
Yeah.
what really encapsulates that moment of compassion and was when she's standing, looking out over the aftermath and seeing the humanity, the aftermath of the violence.
Mhm.
And though she had to participate in that violence, and she is truly an archetypal warrior, she also saw the repercussions of that violence and the cost of it on all of these people. So I think that really showed a lot of her character. It was a big part of her character too.
There was a statement being made too. When you look and you have a background in literature. I mean, that was your master's, I believe.
Right.
Yeah. And so when you think about me being in film and studying at Sony Studios and going through and doing these different things, you understand just different concepts that happen in film. And anytime in writing or in film, you see somebody remove a piece of clothing or tear a piece of clothing, the author, the director is trying to tell you something. They're trying to show you that they're getting rid of some sort of restraint. They're getting rid of something that has been heaped upon them. It's a symbol of
Trope.
I am freeing myself to be who I need to be. So the director in this case is definitely making a statement. For one, they have a shared vision. They all have it. We talked about shared vision earlier. They have to get to the other side. They have to go through no man's land to get something done. They have a shared vision, and up until that point, nobody was willing to do something. And she was meek. She was being kind of dressed down, and she had to get rid of that. She had to symbolically remove that cloak, remove that shield, or that society had heaped upon her. She had to remove that, come out of the trench, and go do it. And that's why they showed that, to say, like, this is more than just a warrior. This is also a woman that is pulling something away from her that society has heaped upon her.
Let me throw something out there too, because one of the things that really captures the cognitive side of that examination was Stephen, his statements were rooted in perception. It can't be done,
Can't be done.
right? And it wasn't accurate, right? But the perception was it can't be done, and that can't came from fear, right? And it was there's so much to unpack here, because then Wonder Woman presents herself, despite the fact that she wanted to hide her identity. She says it's time to come out. Because of the gravity of the situation, it has to end,
the
right?
adversity.
The adversity, right? And so she, like you said, she sheds the things that would restrict her. She says it can be done. She steps up in that moment because of perspective, right? So perspective beats perception in this. It scares people, right? Because they were all shackled by fear. And she does the right thing in that moment. I mean, it's a powerful, powerful scene. And I loved how you talked about at the end where she steps out over the crowd. I have a little bit of a different interpretation of that ending, of the scene where she's looking out and she realizes she's looking at these people who are celebrating her thank you, the reprieve, right? The reward essentially for overcoming fear was freedom of that darkness that they were all experiencing. And when you translate that into a leadership situation, all I can say is yes. You know,
I think one of the things that kind of, I'm a cynic when it comes to certain film tropes and stuff like that. And of course, Wonder Woman is a superhuman being. Of course she can do stuff like this. And she's, we as humans, normal people, we're not bulletproof. We have limitations that she didn't have. However, I back to what you're saying here is that, and Suzanna, you've mentioned, when you were saying something earlier, I thought about this too, some of the women in our lives that they're not channeling their Wonder Woman. I'm not talking about people being bulletproof, but I am talking about the spirit and that archetypal energy of the warrior itself. And so just because Wonder Woman is superhuman, that's a limitation on reality, or it breaks the reality thing. But it is also a symbol that so many of us, and I guess I've known you for quite a while, Suzanna, and it doesn't surprise me that you're a big fan of Wonder Woman, because you have this presence about yourself, and you put yourself in. You're not afraid to step forward in the things you do, the relationships that you build. So there's a lesson for so many, not only women but men, to be learned in that sense too. That we have to make. Go back to what you said, Dave. Is you have to make a choice. You have to choose to drop the trench coat.
Yeah.
You have to choose to step into your action.
And that's easy for us, but I want to actually ask you a question. And I know this, I don't want to put you on the spot, but we're 4 men, and in my lifetime, actually probably a little bit before my lifetime, there was a time when women couldn't even get credit cards. Right? There was that a man had to co-sign on the credit card.
My mom.
Yeah, so it's fairly recent, and so here you've come up in a system where you had to make some. You had to take the cloak off at some point. Was there a moment for you like that where you had to just be like, I have to?
Time to shine.
Tuesday.
For me, it was just another Tuesday.
I mean that's half serious, half joking. It's when I was a younger woman, and I think I had just a different perspective on the world, because when we're 20, we think we're so smart and we just know all the things and we have all the solutions, and we don't understand why the older people are telling us dumb things. I thought, oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to be in this whatever wave of feminism or whatever is where, yeah, we lead the charge ahead, and so there are all these rights and all these freedoms, and I didn't quite understand sometimes what the costs of some of those were, and not to digress into that, but any situation we're in life, whether it's parenthood, motherhood, a romantic relationship, a work situation, career situation, we might find ourselves like putting the cloak back on, and kind of dimming the light, and kind of like keeping it on the down low, and kind of, okay, just let me go along to get along here. And so then within those situations, we can ask, like, I wonder if this is a moment to throw that cloak off and let the breastplate out, and do those things. And so I think it's a regurgitation of that. I don't think there's, for myself anyway, it's not like there's one pivotal moment of like, yes, this is when I became Wonder Woman, but oh, here, I got to do it again and again and again. And it's like, oh, does this get easier?
No.
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 And what's I think it's unfortunate. So we as men have those moments too, but there's an expectation that we're always on. We're always.
You're always tough. You're always invincible.
Yeah,
You're always
we're
brave and
supposed to be,
strong.
right? But we get tired of doing that too. But society is set up in such a way that I think that there are cultural as well as political and social structures in place that bolster us more than women are bolstered.
Well, it depends. I mean, you think about like our, male superheroes, right? Clark, Bruce, they all hide. They all hide,
Yeah, the glasses.
right? Wolverine, right? Doesn't come out until,
First time.
the Hulk.
Yeah,
That's probably, you wouldn't like me when I'm angry. Yeah, so there's an interesting duality here, and to me it's intriguing. Like, why all the hiding, right? And I think maybe that's who am I thinking of? The blue guy, the universe guy.
Flash.
From Watchmen?
Yeah,
Oh, Mr.
The Blue Man Group?
The Smurfs.
Mr. Universe or something like that. Dr. Manhattan.
What would we do without
That's
him?
why I respect him, because he
fall apart.
can't hide. He
Right.
just has to be
Who he is.
there, and that's one of the reasons why I'm intrigued by those types. But even then, I mean, that was a radiation accident and all this other stuff. But
So I think I'm always thinking in the terms of archetypes, and so this, we want this strength. We always, all of us individually, regardless of man or woman, there's this part of us that has to step into our strength and has to. But the challenge we have is that confidence. We have not been tested enough to have the confidence to live into that potential. So I think one of what Wonder Woman really does is it sets us it gives us that North Star of what is possible. Not necessarily, again, she's superhuman, but the attitude, the representation, the symbolism of this part of ourselves that gets to step forward.
Yeah.
Dr. Dave, you said something a few minutes ago about what was it when Steve overcame his fear, then on the other side was freedom. What did you say about that? Do you remember?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. It's interesting because it was that strength that allowed, despite his fear, to take the field, and he pulled off a superhuman feat.
Sure.
In a lot of ways. I mean, man, I would love to be able to take a 100-yard shot with the
I knew that was coming.
pump action shotgun. I mean, that's fantastic.
It was a slug, dude.
It was a slug. It was amazing. But, he still, it was one of those situations where, despite that fear, somebody had to take that first step. And he wanted to, but, in the trench, he wanted to, but he was like, oh, can't do it. It can't do it. He's crippled. Sorry.
They had watched hundreds of people fail.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and two thoughts. I mean, one, when you first said that, I thought, oh, that's a little bit at the core of a number of like spiritual traditions. The idea that if you will wrestle with your fear, your reward is freedom, right?
Oh, so true.
And the other thing that came up for me, okay, so not a brain scientist, but kind of wish I was one in another life. Maybe I'll come back around as a neuroscientist. But there's this concept of like diffuse awareness and focused awareness. You know this? So women, supposedly our brains are better at diffuse awareness, which is why when we walk into a room, we see that there's dust all over that, and the bin out there is overflowing, and all those little things that are like yelling at us for our attention, because our awareness is just able to be diffused, whereas men have more that focus, like this is the mission, this is the task, I'm going to do this. And that moment in the trench where she sees all the suffering, and he sees like, this is the mission, let's do it this way. I was like, oh, there's such male-female brains.
When I was in radio, I saw that a lot. Actually, there was a female broadcaster that I was working with, and she pointed that out to me. She said, you're listening to what's being broadcast, but you're queuing up the next thing, and there's a focus thing that has to go on there, right? And I always had trouble with it. And so she could be listening to 3 different things and know exactly what was going on with it. And I asked her about it. She's like, she said, I really just think it's the women's brain thinks differently. And oddly enough, when I go to restaurants, I cannot sit somewhere where I can see a television, because I will not be able to have a coherent conversation because I'll be so distracted. So it's something I've learned about myself.
Squirrel.
Squirrel.
Yeah.
Well, I got a question, and I think this question's just going to trigger Dave, so it's the only reason why I'm asking it.
Oh, yes. We got servant leadership.
Oh, is it really?
I roll.
What about Steve in this scene displays positive masculinity, that when Diana went into no man's land, that he got everybody else to say, follow her.
Oh, you were asking her, or you just
It's
figured
kinda
trying to trigger me?
We're kind of throwing it to you because we had earlier conversation about it. We didn't change the question.
Okay.
Yeah. Something about it being biased?
Well, yeah, I mean, so we talk about positive and negative masculinity, right? Or positive and negative femininity. I mean, yeah, sure, we can look at the different elements there, but, in moments of distress like that, it really kind of boils down to right versus wrong. Are we going to... And I don't think that the right thing is dictated by gender. I just don't. A lot of the right thing is an intrinsic thing. There are things that inform it, right? The way you were raised, the culture that you're in. There's a lot of things that would inform the right thing. Your right thing would be different from somebody who lives halfway around the world. Right? Perspective versus perception at this point. But it's, and that's sort of the point, like what is positive or negative in that situation? People are dying. Can we stop it? Because here's the thing, the other side of it too is to take that field means that more people are going to die. To win means more people are going to die.
More sacrifice.
Absolutely. Right? So it becomes a force of will, right? How willing are you, or how resolute are you to achieve the end result, right? And for me, I think women, in a lot of ways, have a leg up there. The resolve, and not universally, of course, but I think a lot of women have a stronger resolve than men in certain, if not many, circumstances.
It might be because they've endured. Oh, just this Tuesday I had to, there's so that scene right there, or the moment when he rallies everyone. It reminds me of those moments. In the Marine Corps, I had female leaders that worked with me, and I worked for female leaders, and there was a reticence to always second guessing because they were women. And
They would second guess
no,
themselves.
well, some of that probably, but I could only see it from
Okay.
from my perspective and the fellow men that were following.
Mhm.
And so I worked with Reynolds. She became a general. I was in Afghanistan with her. She was a female colonel. She was in a command position in combat. Highest ranking female colonel in a combat capacity, and she was exceptional. But there was always some sort of little back talk about it, And I think your question, Cam, ties into that. And like those men who were reticent or had some hesitation or negative aspect to follow that person, regardless of whether she was a man or woman. But the fact that they did have that hesitation would lead to that, what I would consider a level of negative masculinity, because they were letting those gender stereotypes get in the way of what was possible. And so in that scenario, Steve does the thing. He looks around, he's like, what are we waiting on? Who cares?
She's getting it done. Let's go.
Yeah, what are you waiting on?
I got another perspective to add to that.
Yeah.
And it's just option C, right? Speaking from a combat experience, bullets flying. Here's a person that these guys have been fighting and dying together for, I don't remember what year it was, but World War I was, 4 years. So let's say it's three years in, and they've been fighting and dying. They know how everybody operates. They know and trust everybody. Then there's this person that steps into the equation and says, you need to do this. Well, just because she happens to be a woman. Well, lady, we've been doing that and we've been dying.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when
They have
Nick
no
the new
reason to
guy
trust
shows
her.
up.
Right. Right.
Nick the new guy shows up, and you're like, oh, thanks for that insight.
Yeah.
But you
Right.
realize that maybe Nick the new guy's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was just I wanted to exercise that for Dave, because I know he loves, no AB fallacies, but there was a third option of, well, we just talked that. I was like, what if it wasn't necessarily that it was because she was a woman, so much as it was like they have developed no trust with this person whatsoever. So I actually have the next question for you about that. How can men take on a supportive role to women without losing or feeling like they're losing influence?
Yeah. Okay, so I just want to make a mental note that I want to come back to asking about the terms positive and negative masculinity,
now.
because I think that's an interesting place to go.
Sure, let's do that first, because we can come back to this question.
Side road, okay. So yeah, I'm just curious about the word choice there, the language choice, and positive, negative, those are loaded in their own way. Other terms could be things like healthy or unhealthy, or functional, unfunctional, constructive, destructive. So I'm just kind of curious how you landed on positive and negative.
My words were in response to the question.
He didn't like the positive. That was the point. So,
So this is really a question for you.
Sure.
Yeah, just curious to know how you landed
Well,
on
because in today's culture, I think it is as you said, very loaded phrasing, and no one talks about positive, negative femininity. The conversation always, from our perspective, revolves around positive or toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
So one of the main reasons why we even started this group that we, Oxesis, our men's group that we meet with, is we can't control the narrative, but what we can control is our actions. But there are still terminology, you know,
Yeah.
that when we're trying to speak to the whole,
Yeah.
that what's the phrasing that's going to get the message across
Got
the
it.
quickest.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
positive is thrown out there like, okay, if I'm going to try to convince a woman that we are upstanding men,
Mm-hmm.
I have to use terminology that they're more likely to respond to.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess to kind of rescue him a little bit there, and he did preface it, and I do appreciate that with, this is going to trigger him, is because one of the things that I talk about specifically regarding emotionally charged words like positive or negative, is I'm not a fan of that. So it's like information, right? There's no such thing as positive or negative information. There's good or bad information. Right? So good isn't necessarily positive. I can definitely give you good information. That is negative. And so,
But if it's useful,
yeah,
it's good
exactly,
for me to
right?
have it. Yeah.
So, and I can absolutely give you positive information that is absolutely terrible, right? And so, I'm not a big fan of conflating all that. And so that's why I think he was trying to rib on me a little bit.
I got to create conversation somehow.
Yeah, no, I appreciate
I
it.
think kind of the focus of that debate there comes back to avoiding generalities, because you said when we first started off, you sat here and you were kind of disarmed because we were listening and respectful. Well, not all men are that way, and we are not like this all the time. So
Yeah.
we're fully capable of interrupting one another.
2 hours in, I know the good behavior will fall to the wayside.
Yeah.
Well, and I am in favor of, like, we could just drop the word toxic when we're talking about men. I feel like we could do that. I feel
I
like
would
it's
agree with
not
that, yeah.
serving the conversion. So
Sold.
I would,
Yeah.
I preach into the choir here. So I'm saying this to the women who are listening. Then let's please not call men toxic anymore. We are just as toxic, or at least we have the capacity to be.
I think social media has a big part in that, because
Yes.
what's trending?
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
okay, help me out here. Maybe 10 years ago, suddenly, everybody was autistic. Then it was, oh, I think I have ADHD.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And then the next thing that was trending was, oh, well, that's toxic. So
I shouldn't roll my eyes. These are real things, but yes, I.
well, I mean, it's just like, oh, I have a hard time paying attention. I have ADHD.
Yeah,
That's just how
We're
quickly
all looking
people
for a
will just-
bandwagon,
yeah,
aren't we?
that's all it is.
Well, the point that I want to make is, yes, absolutely, everyone at this table has the capacity to be toxic, and everyone at this table has the capacity to be an angel and, a humanitarian and whatever. And so we are all the things. We are good and evil.
And I would say that, and I'm finding throughout these episodes, this is a common thing that I say, is about awareness and choice. If we're not aware of our behavior and how we're acting, it's hard to, we're acting in an unconscious manner. We're being reactive.
Yeah.
But yet if we are aware, then we can make a better choice. We can choose to behave better. And sadly, because the stigma is associated with men's mental health, so many guys aren't willing to dig deep and just maybe peel back the onion a little bit because it'll make them cry, and they don't want to do that. And so there's a level of men are unaware, so they're not necessarily in a position to make better decisions.
How do you navigate that? Because you deal with that when you're going. Gavin's gonna call you up and he needs help getting a date, and he's gonna hop off a Tinder, because you're gonna be the one now. But what if he does that? How do you navigate that?
Yeah. Well, so I don't believe that shaming, scolding, and blaming is ever the way to motivate anyone to transform. So there's this, I'm going to corrupt this saying, but there's a saying like, you don't shame the boy if you're trying to get the king, right? So you could turn it. You don't shame the woman to make her feel like a destructive or faulty little girl, and you're not going to get the queen, right? So you have to treat the person at least initially to kind of the level you want them to be at. It's like in parenting, you kind of talk to your kids the way you want them to behave, unless until they maybe say or do something otherwise. It's like, oh, okay, now
Now we have
Just-
repercussions.
Yeah, now-
Associated
and
with the
conscious-
Pygmalion effect. It makes total sense.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. And as you say, consciousness is really the goal, not perfection. Every day when I'm throwing off that cloak, I'm trying to do it in a conscious manner as I interact with people. I'm sort of selecting for like the people I'm going to kind of vibe with, or those that are also on a path of discovering consciousness. But that doesn't put me on any ivory towers, right? So when we go, brings us back full loop to the concept of curiosity, is how you kind of deal with that less conscious person, maybe.
As a man, or even an individual, let's take gender out of the equation there. As an individual, there's certain ways that you would do things. And then there's another person who you answer to that would do something completely different. Now, it's different than, okay, 3 + 1 = 4, but so does 2 + 2, right? So now when you add gender back into the equation there, how do we handle it? How would a woman handle a man being in a leadership role where she knows that potentially she could be like, oh, there's a better way of doing that? Likewise, how is a man, recognize and value different perspectives of a woman being in a leadership role?
Yeah. This might be one of those things where the devil's in the details just a little bit, because I can imagine, sometimes we just have to make choices about what is the outcome I want here. I may not get to dictate how that outcome is achieved, like, because I'm not leading it, right? Like, if I was the leader, I'd get to decide how to get from A to B to C to D and so forth. But if there's just a certain outcome I want, like the trash is out, then I don't need to micromanage, like, oh, you need to take this path through the house to get to the garage, to turn a left, next to the house, to put it in the dumpster, and then you need to use the rose-scented trash bin liners as opposed to the lavender-scented one. You know what? Just get it done. So I think we just kind of need to maybe decide sometimes where we're going to plant our flag on
Right.
outcomes.
So I'm going to flip it around in the sense of focus more on how do we promote more generative, and I will use the term healthy, masculinity in the sense that men are, number one, recognizing women in leadership roles and supporting them in the best way. Is there, can we zero in? I want your take on that.
I don't know if I can fully speak to this, because I feel like this is a conversation that is really alive in corporate settings, perhaps, and I'm not sure I have much of a finger on that pulse necessarily, but maybe just those consciousness checks, those gut checks, at least in home or in public spaces, to just go within stillness, quiet, checking within yourself. How am I showing up here? How am I impacting people? Maybe there's a female friend that you have that you can kind of say, hey, I'd like some feedback about how my energy is impacting people. That's how consciousness is built, right? Through those conversations and through that self-awareness.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I would love to chime in on the leadership part of this and support what she said a little while ago about vision orientation, right? Because here's the thing. There are leadership roles, and then there are leaders. If you are in a leadership role, it doesn't necessarily mean you are a leader, right? And just because you might be a leader doesn't necessarily mean that you are using the right leadership style to achieve that outcome. Respect, support, I think, resides almost solely on the vision itself, right? If I'm going to support you, it's going to be towards that outcome. If I'm going to support you, it's going to be towards that outcome, right? Then secondary would be your approach in doing that, right? So going back to, I'm not going to dictate the way you go through that. So that appeals to self-determination theory, right? Give me the autonomy to get it done the way that I feel like I can get it done. If I need help, then awesome, you can be that supportive role, and so on and so forth. And then at the very end of that, see, I don't even know if I would throw gender in, because those are the things that are important to outcome, to the outcomes that we seek.
I love that answer. You were going to say something,
Well,
Chelsea.
yeah, but gender does get thrown in, and I think we talk a lot about borrowed confidence, and we talk about men and women in leadership roles. So often we see a woman get put into a leadership role and almost throw off her cloak of being feminine and borrow confidence by adopting these so-called male communication tactics, all of a sudden becoming crass, or seemingly like a man is almost boiling masculinity down to ooga dooga, right?
Caveman.
Caveman, and starting and becoming crass and losing her feminine aspect, and it actually has contrasting effect on men. We actually lose respect for that. We do respect the feminine nature of a woman who can come in and be. My wife is a great example. She's a Native American. She grew up with goats. She just on a farm, just beating goats and on the head with a pot and all this stuff. And that's who she is, And
That seems kind of who could do
she
that.
is a little bit, But she doesn't walk in the room. She doesn't walk in the room and cuss like a sailor either. She walks in and she's feminine. She speaks softly when she needs to speak softly, and I respect her. That's why I fell in love with her, because she has the feminine quality to it. She didn't try to borrow confidence or steal seemingly masculine parts of her character to come in but I've seen that in leadership roles. Women they do that, and I don't know if we were getting into that topic, but I wanted to kind of come in is that an aspect that when we're talking to our listeners and our viewers, some of them may be women. Look, that's not a thing that we're looking for out of a female necessarily.
Well, and that's a great point. I mean, but again, we have to understand where we're going, right? How do you properly support anybody, male or female, if you don't know where we're going?
Right, that was your first step, was the vision, and then the
Yeah.
second step then was the application.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And I think we're begging a question here that I am proud of us, the fact that we're coming to the conclusion that it doesn't matter who the gender of the leader.
Right.
And if we as a society can get to the point where that is a truth, then we've made progress.
Well, and
then
so-
Suzanna doesn't have to worry about what happened last Tuesday.
100%. So let's run a mental exercise here.
Huh?
And just imagine for a second, visualize for a moment the same scene.
Do we hold hands?
Oh, see, that's teamwork. So
That's
teamwork. Replace Wonder Woman
Okay. I
with.
can never replace Gal Gadot. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know,
can't.
right? Gal she is amazing, but replace the character with anybody, superhuman or not.
Okay.
Wolverine, your next door neighbor. If anybody had the intestinal fortitude to do that, would the outcome of that scene have been any different?
Well, I would hope that no, it wouldn't. But
Right.
this illustrates, I would say, one of the challenges in our society is because there was this there's this question about, oh my God, and there's a moment of intensity about that, not necessarily because somebody's stepping over the berm into the fray. It's a woman.
Well, but even still, you could use any superhuman anybody.
Like Leroy Jenkins.
Or not, right? Think of all the female superheroes that are
Nerd
there,
reference, sorry.
right? Think of all the female superheroes. The outcome would have been the same, right?
The hesitation.
No, the hesitation was because of the fear and death, but somebody to storm. The Stephen's first response wasn't anything other than, no, don't die. I have these crazy feelings about you. His girl, was putting herself in danger. He's scared. Everybody else is, what in the world's going on? And I think your point was spot on, where it was like, who are you and why are you here and what's going on? And I think that was illustrated from a cinematic standpoint when she turns her back to the camera and you see the guy off just right over off of the, to the left, where, you see the shock. She's got golden uniform stuff going on. What's going on under that cloak, And so you get the prelude from the guy over on the side going, "Whoa, there's something going on here," And then the audience is the last to see it, but everybody else on that side of the cloak got to see it. Like, oh, gal's hot, or whatever it was. Like, what in the world's going on? And then there's a lot going on there, but. Again, it could have been Ivy, it could have been Catwoman, it could have been any of them.
So I want to challenge myself here in this moment. So when I saw that scene, I was looking at gender types, gender stereotypes more than the fear factor.
What do you mean? Like, explain.
Well, I mean, just like I said before, there was this hesitation for the Marines I served with to support the female leaders that we were following.
Okay.
Okay. So my life experience, I was was filtering through my life experience in that moment, and the hesitation I saw was that these men were hesitating to follow this woman.
Mm.
Where you saw it, well, we're just hesitating because we're afraid.
Mm.
And this is a great experience. This is a great experiment in the sense that you're challenging us take out the gender, and thus the stress, the uncertainty still stands on its own.
Mm.
So my question, and I kick it to you, Suzanna, in this sense first, is like, does gender in that dynamic play as a bigger role as I think it does?
I wonder if it could be socially acceptable to admit that it does, for men even to admit, that it does. Like, I mean, I think probably the conditioning of all the toxic masculinity conversation has been, don't you dare admit that you might be hesitant to follow a woman.
Mhm.
And I don't think that's fundamentally a unconstructive thing to say. I think it's a thing to unpack. Like, well, why, right? Yeah, I'm just trying to imagine some kind of scenario where it would be okay to discuss reasons why there might be the hesitation, why the life experiences might add up to, I feel like self-preservation is going to make me pause here. And it just, that's the reality. Like, that there's a truth in that. And it doesn't make women worse or better, anything. It's just like, let's just have an honest conversation about that.
Tell me this though. When you go speak at these places, okay, so one thing happens when a man comes and talks to you that he needs help in dating. He has to essentially do what Stephen, is that his name? Yes, what Stephen does, where he has to go he has to take you on as a leader.
Yeah.
However, you go speak at events. I've heard you speak before. You go speak at events, and you get up there and you'll say that I'm the date maven. I'm a matchmaker. There is inherently going to be men in the room who are turned off by that because of the. Do you get that a lot?
I do.
Okay, so see, that's the other side of it, where they see you as the woman at that point. That is a gender specific thing, though, because you are a leader. You're a leader, and they don't like that.
I think that the turn off, or the kind of the repulsion, if you will, is around one of two things.
Okay.
So as a matchmaker, there's maybe this like non-conscious belief that she's going to try to get anyone and everyone she knows to be available to be matched, and I'm not available. And I need to make darn sure she knows I'm not available, because I don't want her recruiting me, right? Like, oh, let me cling a little more to my wife or girlfriend, and and I get that. Like, there's that protection reaction, and I know I'm not, peddling new relationships to anyone that already has one.
Right.
I started my PhD at the University of Hawaii in cultural studies, which is an offshoot of feminist studies. I was looking at humor theory. That's what I was.
Humor theory, like stand-up comedy.
Like the idea of why do jokes work? We create an expectation. One thing is going to equal another thing, but then we twist it on in, and all of a sudden the incongruency causes us to laugh. Okay, that's like a fundamental of how jokes work. But there's more to it than that. Right. So I wrote papers on Gary Larson's The Far Side. And, So anyway, but part of that, I did take classes on feminist studies, and so I realized that I probably have a heightened sensitivity to gender dynamics, which, and this is, we're all here to grow, and so I'm proud to be an ally for feminism in this world, because I have 2 daughters, I have 4 sisters, and so my mom raised us pretty much on her own. She couldn't get a credit card until she couldn't get a credit card until I think I was 8 years old. She had to go find somebody to sign for her, and she didn't have husbands.
Oh, yeah, because you're
I'm 52. Yeah.
Well, your dad, not me.
Yeah, my dad was in prison.
Yeah.
So that I've seen the effects that women have experienced living in the society that exists. So I've become an advocate and an ally. But I think it also, and Dave, you've challenged me on this, is just because I think and feel that way doesn't mean I need to lay that template or that look at everything through that lens. I need to be mindful of that lens. And so this is one of those things when we look at this scene, is I'm seeing it from this gender dynamic much more, it's more front of mind for me than I think it is for you guys.
Okay, so I want to see if we could go down the rabbit hole of human theory, but also I'm having this thought, or humor theory. having this thought of like, would we react as strongly to Wonder Woman if she had no sexual component?
Oh,
If she weren't hot, if she weren't wearing a skimpy outfit, if she were wearing, I don't know, scrubs or something, that's a little bit like more neutral. And I would say we probably wouldn't, because culturally we need our female superheroes to be hot. Like, that's just baseline. So that's discussion A. And then discussion B is, a lot of, so I studied humor theory in college in my master's program as well. And a lot of the, what we understand to be funny, if we look back to like the Greeks in 5th century, it was when male actors would take on female personas and affectations, and they would wear costumes with, huge anatomy and, things that were just really like in stark contrast, and that was considered funny. And it can, to this day, it's funny to see, I don't know, Tyler Perry put on the whole, Medea costume, or,
So the root of that is incongruency.
incongruency.
And so we see this.
What's incongruency?
Incongruency is when two things should align, but then they don't.
And then that's funny.
And what we
As a
find,
mechanic, I
and
can
what
relate.
that causes, what's that?
As a mechanic, I can relate.
Yeah. So what that causes is discomfort. And then when we feel that discomfort,
Relax.
we experience nervousness, which then vents out as laughter.
Yeah.
So same thing with this. Think about this in the sense that we as men are seeing Wonder Woman in this perilous environment. Death all around, but yet she is wearing skimpy outfit. It is impractical. There is a level of incongruency there, and we feel that incongruency. We feel this disconnect, and it is uncomfortable because at one sense we're titillated by her sexuality, but on the other hand we're excited because of the danger involved.
Well, let me challenge that a little bit and
Yeah.
go
I'm
with
glad
the
you
movie
are, 'cause I
300.
got one. Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
You
Same
know,
thing.
I mean, so the lack of clothing, historically speaking, I mean, warriors would go to battle nude. So it's not just a female thing. And historically speaking, a lot of the higher echelon of society wouldn't. Well, I'll say it the other way. A lot of the lower echelon would cover themselves. A lot of the higher echelon wouldn't, right? And so when we think about heroes, and let's take out the superhuman element. If you're bleeding profusely and somebody's going to repair your body, does it matter to you whether it's male or female? No, we're looking for outcome orientation here, right? So we have to be careful, and I think you're absolutely right, and I love the way that you said that. We have to be careful about the lens that we look through, because I think when we're talking about outcomes, right, there's a couple of things that we have to know. Emotion drives bias, right? And that can be dangerous. The other side of it too is that at the end of the day, we all want our ideal outcomes. And when it comes to the ideal outcomes, when we really boil it down, whoever can get us there best, most efficient, most accurately, becomes our hero. Sometimes that's our mother, sometimes that's our wife, sometimes that's our buddy, whatever it is. And so we have to be careful about what we lay on, especially when it comes to the others, because generally speaking, when I said that, all of you nodded your head, right?
Wow.
About the outcomes, and
Sure.
I want the best outcomes and the best strategy. You all nodded your head a little bit.
You were watching me?
Yeah. When I said that, I was curious to see what the physical response was going to
But
be.
so that is the ideal reaction. That's the ideal response. Yes,
Sure.
outcome makes sense. Do you want to be right or do you want to be accurate? Accuracy is like, yes, of course, all of us wants the outcome is what we should be focusing on. But the reality of it is we are conditioned. And yes, Greeks and Romans and Spartans did go to battle less
Unarmored.
guard. But I promise you, when we were in Afghanistan and Iraq, we were geared up.
Yeah,
right?
but can you imagine the fear that you would have instilled in the enemy by doing so?
My wife is not scared when I try to fight her that way. At all.
No?
It's laughter.
Okay, okay.
Not even-
So it's humorous.
funny.
It's
Yeah.
humorous. Okay.
Yeah, there's some incongruency. there.
It is very incongruent. That's the word. I've never been called that. But all right.
Yeah. That's the deformity
Yes,
is a form of
that-
incongruity.
yeah.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say? What were you gonna?
Well, I was their outfit, specifically Wonder Woman's, is based off of the Amazonians, which is a culture of women around the ancient Greek time frame,
Sure.
and they have not adapted. If you know, like their culture is still like we still wear the
They're
uniform, the garb.
anachronistic.
What's that?
Anachronistic. They maintain their old
Yes,
ways.
yes. So when she's bearing this outfit, it's the same as it was, 2,000 years ago. So I don't know. I don't know, like, if we want to get into the deep dive of that, but how much of that is let's make her as skimpy as possible versus this is what everybody wore and we have not adapted.
I mean, the general audience doesn't know what you know, though. The general audience sees Gal Gadot dressed like that, and it helped. It helped in that aspect for the sex appeal.
This is also a nice segue into William Marston and his history. He's the creator of Wonder Woman, and as
Comic book character,
the comic book character of the comic book character, and if you look at his history, and Suzanna illuminated this with us yesterday, and I had to go do some research, and I was amazed. Yes, he had a polyamorous relationship. He
would be so in style right now because ethical non-monogamy is so on trend.
Ethical non-monogamy.
E&M, if you see it abbreviated on the apps.
Multiple relationships with permission.
Yeah. Okay. And then, but he was also into bondage and BDSM. So the lasso tying things. Oddly enough, William Marston was also the creator of the lie detector.
Yeah.
What?
So the lasso itself, which tells the truth, that same dude created the lie detector.
Inspired by the lie detector. Yeah.
That's why that name sounded familiar. I'm like trying to pull back the Rolodex and trying to figure it out.
Bells going off in the background.
It's ringing a bell.
So I think in one of the criticisms of his first Wonder Woman comic book was that it was too skimpy, and there was a lot of spanking and binding within this episode. Within the
I did not have spanking on the bingo card
for Wonder Woman.
the key is in the
I
contract.
want to hear about this bingo card.
Yeah.
This might be something you can patent.
Thank you. Continue though.
Well, no, what I'm saying
As
is,
he leans back, he's like, "Tell me more."
More,
You have my attention.
well, maybe we need to open with this. Or
Yeah.
There you go.
But the whole point being is that William Marston, his own personal, it goes what we were talking about, the inferred author.
Yeah.
We have the
Implied
author plus the implied author. He as an author, his history included all of this behavior, which then informed the depiction of Wonder Woman.
And he wasn't just a total kinkster. I mean,
No.
he was had quite an intellect, as did Elizabeth, his wife, and all of their partner. They were quite intellectual women.
Harvard,
Harvard
psychologist.
Yeah, which I think they did let him go when they found out his lifestyle didn't line up with the Harvard image.
I still want to dive into because I don't know that we necessarily got an answer other than spanking. That's my takeaway from there. But
That's a good takeaway.
It is a good
Good.
takeaway.
What do we? What's the conversation to be had though? Is what's the intention of the outfit? Because again, she's wearing something this is war garb, and
In her culture.
In her culture, right? And they've been completely cut off from the world and didn't adapt with it.
Where do they live?
Paradise
Damascaria. I
Island.
think I'm saying that right.
The mascara?
Damascus.
It's in Damascus, Syria.
Damascaria.
I thought she was from Paradise Island. Is that like one of the islands in
I think that has something to do with Flavor Flav.
Oh, Flavor. Oh.
I mean, anytime that there is a scantily clad woman in a movie, it is absolutely intentional. It's supposed to be scantily clad, even if you tie some sort of historical concept to it. There's even my mentor Mark August, who's the guy I trained with for doing a lot of my film work. He's even told me, he said, go watch a movie. A scantily clad woman in red will often open a reveal shot in a scene, and it is intentional. Any beach scene, there always is going to be that. It's because it gets your attention. It draws you in there, but it's not going to be the context of the shot, but it opens you up. You don't have to follow it. She'll be off scene in 3 seconds, However, in this case, to keep it on there, they have it there. It does get your attention every once in a while because you are watching a 2.5 or 2 hour movie, and you have to have some sort of something to bring you back into bring you back into attention. And so it's Gal Gadot. I mean, they didn't have I'm not going to say a name because we're going to get in trouble, but they didn't have somebody else play that role. They had Gal Gadot.
She met the
She met the criteria.
criteria, the standards.
The fun fact, red is also serves that same function. If you have an app on a dating site, they've found that the color red in your dating profile gets more right swipes than other colors.
Yeah.
So it's the attention getter.
Susanna, you said something earlier, I believe, when you talked about how Wonder Woman got across the field, and she kind of took in the carnage after the fact, and I believe you used the word compassion. Like there was something there, like she was compassionate towards the human race at that point. Why do you think compassion is often seen as a feminine trait?
This is layered. I mean, there are parts of our brains that are just kind of like primed from birth to experience empathy, and the mirror neuron effect is stronger in baby girls than it is in baby boys, and then culture kind of reinforces that, in the way that we're raised in schools and church and parenting and all that. So I do think that it's not a bad thing that it came to be associated as a feminine trait. I think, it's just a positive human trait, and I don't see it as necessarily something we should be ashamed or embarrassed about as women, to say I'm compassionate.
I like that. It's a human trait. I like that.
Yeah, I think the division between masculine and feminine, and from a cultural perspective, it wasn't so polarized. It's become more polarized, I would say, and that then it forces men to exclude these other characteristics. And I think that's one of the reasons why auxesis is so important, is we're trying to demystify these stereotypes. I sew.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I sew. Okay, is that
Yeah, why am I just now finding this out?
Right?
okay? So does that make me less of a man?
If anything,
No, it's
it
gonna-
enhances,
Yeah, okay, I
my
sew.
opinion.
It's going to keep you busy for the next couple months, because I got a nice box of stuff I'm going to send your way.
Ditto.
With the economy the way it is, I need to start a side hustle.
Yeah.
No, but so that's something. But I learned that from my mother, right? My grew up in with an absent father, so clearly the skills that I developed were aligned with these gendered skill sets, right? Now, granted, I had a big brother, and I know how to. I also rebuilt the 304 V8 in my Jeep, during the summer of my 16th year, so I can rebuild an engine too.
I'm curious, though. Wait a second. We think about, for instance, the history of suit making, right?
It's a masculine thing.
That's,
Tailors were men.
men, right? So, yeah, and I just, as we weave this, it's sort of like women being compassionate. That's true. But women also have a capacity for the opposite, unmatched, right? So while they may have unmatched compassion in some regards, they also have unmatched capacity for the opposite, right? And
What would that be?
A scorned woman.
yeah,
The crazy.
exactly, right? So the vindictiveness and the absolute disdain for her target, right? I mean, there are certain stereotypes, for example, about post-divorce that exist for a reason. Scorned woman, right? You just said, hell hath no fury, right? Very old phrases. The capacity for that unbelievable resolve, right, is unmatched in a lot of cases. So it's interesting how, because as people, we will default to certain perspectives, right? The default to a positive or default to a negative, going back to the other. When the truth of the matter is, not to be mean to guys, but we're a little bit more simplistic in certain cases, right? Not to in ooga booga, right? I mean, we're simple sometimes, right? And we're easy to please and easy to destroy in some cases. And it's interesting. So it's if we were going to generalize certain things, and if I was asked to come up with a single word to generalize females, my word would be complex. And
Which is paradoxical, because complex is not simple.
exactly,
Yeah,
right.
that
And
is
so
fair.
and that's one of the things that I really appreciate. I think really about women specifically is that beautiful complexity. And if there was one thing I could frown about or frown upon for men is sometimes our oversimplistic nature. And and again, it's a general. There are exceptions to either rule, but
I think that ties back to what you were talking about, the two different perception types. What were they called again? Yeah.
Diffuse awareness and focused awareness.
Right. Men are focused. They want to be
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
And that recognition that wow, women are complex and I don't understand them is what drives a lot of people to work with a dating coach or matchmaker for some clarity about, I don't really know how to navigate dating means I don't know how to navigate women.
Right.
Because it's about the emotional experience that you give a person, and if there isn't some skill development around that within a dating context, things generally
Which
don't go your way.
brings up an interesting question because you said something earlier, and I've been chewing on it ever since, which is you talked about men's perception of what you do, and it occurred to me the question I had was, well, if I was in the market, who better to talk to about a partner
that woman.
than a woman,
Yeah.
right? And so it would be interesting, right? Because like I guarantee it, and I love you guys. Don't get me wrong here, but if I was shooting to land a date, I mean these are my boys, but I wouldn't go ask them. I would probably come ask you because they're gonna give me.
What would a guy do?
What would a guy do? Yeah.
Well,
I know.
DM. You start with the DM. All right. And
It's got to be a
I-
meme.
Let her know what she's talking about.
And you just
it
slide
worked
on in
once.
there.
It worked once. We've been married 8 years.
All
I'm just saying.
right. You raised.
That's a true story, though. That's not a joke. That's
You
actually
slid
a true
into her
story.
DMs?
She slid into my DMs.
Your deal.
But no, I slid back.
I am
I
scandalized.
met my current wife on Bumble.
See?
Yeah.
It works. Anyway.
I noticed that safety is one of your segments of the
Oh, yeah.
adversity
Oh,
nexus
get him going,
here.
please.
And this is a big thing for dating because oftentimes men are not through any fault of their own, but just unaware of how much safety has to be a concern for a woman in singleness, in navigating the dating world, and anything a man can do to create the perception of safety for that woman, it allows her to throw that cloak off and everything else you want thrown off at some point. And I keep like knocking into myself here. At some point in the progression of things, right? So safety has to be the foundation, and it helps if you can be funny too.
Can I push back a little bit?
Sure.
What if instead of safety, it was empowerment?
Yep.
What if instead of feeling safe, the partner empowered them?
Made you feel like.
Yeah, I might suggest that safety can result in empowerment, but maybe define that a little more.
Well, safety typically leads to some pretty negative things.
Okay.
Safety is an illusion, right?
Mhm.
But empowerment, that's a real thing, right? So if you feel empowered to speak your mind, be the real you, throw off the cloak. And I know you're probably talking more about a physical sense, like I'm not going to abduct you.
Yeah.
Right. But even still, being empowered versus safety, I think I often tell, my students and clients, we have to be very mindful of safety because what follows next is stagnation and decline. But we can divert the ill effects of that approach by empowerment. Right.
And that's kind of what Wonder Woman represents, this empowered woman.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Right. And so, and not to be argumentative or anything, it's just contrastive
Yeah,
inquiry.
yeah.
It's like, I can tell you that in my successful relationships, it's been as a result of empowerment.
I think it's actually powerful though, because it's a thing for a woman to identify. Is the man making her safe, or is he empowering her?
Yeah.
And if Ted Bundy made women safe.
Yeah,
Yeah,
true.
Well, he made them feel safe.
Yeah.
Right,
They
right.
weren't really
Yeah.
safe.
That's the thing.
And
It's
and
the
that's-
illusion.
It's an illusion.
It's the
It's
That
illusion.
was actually the idea was he would make them feel safe. They were not safe ever,
But it was the illusion of safety.
but he never empowered them.
Right.
Well, whether we use the word safety or the word empowerment, probably fundamentally, we as women know we wouldn't stand a chance against a Ted Bundy.
Mhm.
So it doesn't matter what language we put on it. Like
Mhm.
that guy is going to be no good to be around, and we know that, and that's scary.
Mm.
And so that's why I even use the word safety to begin with.
Yeah.
This kind of we talk about what's in trend. This idea about where women were asked the question, "Would you rather be in the woods with a man or a
Oh,
bear?"
yeah.
Yeah.
And there, so many of them are saying, "I'd rather be out there with a bear," because there's at least they know what the nature of a bear is, where
Yeah.
men can be duplicitous, and we
Yeah.
have this capacity for violence, and we have this capacity to, so that's a I could see why women are choosing that, but it seems so ridiculous.
Well, as a man, I would argue that I would also choose the bear.
Oh!
As of yet, a bear hasn't thrown a plate at him.
Yeah.
True.
So
I really want to meet
woman
your
could-
wives.
A woman could just as easily be duplicitous, and
Yeah.
as Dave pointed out earlier, there's the opposite of compassion. Vindictive, destructive, emotionally destructive.
Yeah.
There's a saying somewhere, a man can physically hurt, but wounds heal and go away, and you'll forget about it. But a woman will destroy you emotionally, and that's with you for life.
Yeah.
I've known many women in my life that I would absolutely choose the bear before I would ever pick the woman. So
The commentary that makes on our society is what is interesting here, is that and this is another reason why auxesis is so important, and why what you do is so important, is we start getting people more aware of our capacity for not only for violence but for compassion, for growth, all of those things. And if we can truly drive that, then we can make society better, and we no longer have to have this either or fallacy of a dangerous human and a predictable bear.
right. Well, you said it last episode perfectly. We start respecting people when we understand their capacity. I think that's how you ended it. Like, it was no longer just capacity for violence or capacity for compassion or anything. It was just when we understand what you are capable of.
Yeah.
In every facet of the word.
Yeah, we gain respect.
Exactly. Well, we hope to have you back as a regular guest.
Thank you. I
If
would love to
you know,
join.
the invitation is there for you.
As we go forth with what we're doing here, is there any parting bits of advice or observations you'd like to make for us? And we are accepting of any
Critiques.
compliments, whatever,
You-
external validation.
Yeah.
Please-
Could pat you on the back.
Please tell me I'm good.
Do you want to retract the coolness
Yeah.
statement
Let me
from
look
earlier?
and see if I have any fruit bars in my bag.
well, you cried
Gold
last
star.
episode. Am I going to cry this one?
Well, she doesn't have fruit bars, so.
Oh, sorry,
yeah,
I didn't.
that's
I
what
didn't
I
bring
called it.
snacks, guys. I'll bring snacks next time. But no, so this is just advice for any human being, not just because you're men, and that is just to, however much more we can give compassionate listening to the people around us, even if we just really disagree or we think they're stupid or we just really don't understand. I think it's such a skill to develop in our relationships, in our friendships, in all the places. Try to bring compassion and listening to each other.
I love it, and I love that we're ending on compassion, because the next episode that we're going to be going over is a very personal, near and dear to my heart series. I could not pick a clip, so I'm going to go ahead and warn you now that you're just going to either have to watch all of them or none of them, Aaron. But it's Lord of the Rings, and we're going to
Oh
be
my gosh.
discussing compassion
Haven't seen it.
from a masculine sense.
My wife loves
Can I
it.
pick the scene on that one?
If you pick one, I will have to pick 5 more that also completely represent whatever you pick. So
All right.
that's the
He's got a
problem. I
vision.
sat down. That's the thing. I sat down. I was like, okay, I have to pick one. There has to be a clip to use, but I couldn't do it because for every one, it was like, yeah, that's a good one, but this one's also, we would not be able to talk about it without also talking about this. So I feel like I love Lord of the Rings. You and I have had this conversation almost a year ago at this point about what we're going to get into, so I won't spoil it. But there are so many examples from a cinematic view of Lord of the Rings as a whole that
I see
I
your
am
healthy
excited to talk
masculine
about.
leadership on this. I'm seeing it.
oh well,
Nice.
hey.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to give a real quick shout out to Buckskin Barn. They provided us these awesome tumblers. Is that what they call these? I just call them cup. I think the official term's a tumbler. It's got our logo on it. It's auxesis on there. Gifted to us by Dave. thank you so much for these.
Mhm.
And
Dave, you're amazing.
Cheers.
Uh,
Here's to Susanna, the date
Susanna,
maiden.
yeah.
Oh, we
Yeah,
didn't give her a cup.
Yep,
All
we
right,
got-
I'll just.
we gotta have
ching-ching
like,
with
do we
my
need to have
bottle.
like gifts for guests? You know, like a parting gift. Is
Our
that what
love.
it is?
I think
Our
so.
love.
Our
I-
love.
I think,
I thought so.
I think we need to class it up and
Okay.
make sure we have
We
some
do.
sort of a token for our guests.